Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Rainbow Cotton, a classic remastered. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Success, Rainbow Cotton originally released on the Dreamcast in 2000, though only in the Japanese region. Jumped to May of 2024, and it's now available in this remastered form for the PC via Steam, the Xbox, the PlayStation 4 and 5, and the Nintendo Switch. If you're not familiar with Rainbow Cotton, this is the second Cotton rail shooter following in the vein of Panorama Cotton, which released for the Genesis/Mega Drive. As far as the overall series of Cotton, Cotton is this shooter franchise following the tales of the witch Cotton, as she defeats enemies in hunt of her favorite candy, the Willows. So this title makes several improvements over the original release of Rainbow Cotton, a lot of quality of life improvements, and including the inclusion of a two-player co-op mode, which is how we're going to show off the game today. Now, as far as rail shooters are concerned, I wouldn't say Rainbow Cotton is the best by any stretch, so depending on how much you like the Cotton series or what you like here, this isn't a title that I can recommend for everybody, but let's dive in and you can decide if this is a title that is interesting to you based on what we see here. Finding ourselves at the main menu, there are a couple of modes we can experience the game in. There's the Start Game, which will take you to the new remastered mode. In addition to that, we have the co-op, which is of course how we're going to be showing off the game. We'll get to that in just a moment, but there's also an additional retro mode the developers created. It strips out some of the quality of life improvements in the game and adds some filters to make it feel very much like the original Dreamcast version. I wish you could turn off the filters, but I do appreciate the inclusion of that mode in this release. Starting the game in Start Co-op. On the Switch, one thing it does do, and of course you've probably seen the screen before, is it confirms your controller setup. But here we can see that one player is controlling Cotton, the other player is controlling the fairy Silk. This is in a very Sonic and Tails style from, say, Sonic 2, so that's kind of what you're expecting from this co-op. Starting the game from there, we dive into the cutscenes. There are a lot of anime-style cutscenes throughout the course of this game. You have them at the start of the game, at the start of the stages, and even in the middle of the stages before you fight a boss. They are translated with subtitles, so that's much appreciated, and the animation itself looks like it's been cleaned up a fair bit from the original release. But for our purposes today, we're going to be skipping past those, and there are quite frequent. In the original Dreamcast version, there was an option to skip past them and get right to the action, so I'm surprised they took that out of this release. With all that out of the way, we start our first stage. So, right off the bat, I can say I just love the look of this game. Everything looks really clean in this release, but just that whole late 90s, early 2000s low poly design is just kind of an aesthetic that I really do appreciate. As far as the controls are concerned, this is definitely your standard third-person scrolling rail shooter, where the camera is placed behind the character, and we can move our character around, and the way we move the character around changes where we're shooting. Fortunately, there is a reticule for Cotton, so you can kind of have an idea of where you're aiming. However, that is not present for the second player, Silk, so you just have to judge off where your shots are leading, where exactly you're aiming, which is kind of a problem with this style rail shooter, but for the most part, it works alright overall. In addition to our primary shots, there are a couple other attacks that we have. So for both Cotton and when playing second player with Silk, you might notice that we've got these lock-on icons that are showing up around some enemies. If that icon is pink, that's for Silk. If the player controlling Silk lets go of their fire button, then they'll dive forward, launching themselves at the enemy, basically punch them, go and do damage right into their face. It's a rather interesting form of attack. With Cotton, when playing in co-op, or just from the default as you would just have Silk available with you right from the start if you were playing solo, you can launch the fairies you have at those enemies that are highlighted, and they'll deal damage to those enemies. For Cotton, there's a third type of attack she has, and that's the magic that's indicated in the top right of the screen. So if you've played previous Cotton titles, you might have an idea of what's going on here. You have red magic for fire, blue magic for lightning, and then lastly there's the green magic, which is kind of like an earth or meteor type magic. But one thing that's never really explained anywhere, and this is another problem I have with this particular release, is there's no tutorial or explanation anywhere that I can find. You have two types of spells for each magic that you can use. So if you're not pressing the fire button and you just press one spell, then you get a certain version of the storm, or rather the magic. For the fire, you get that fire dragon. However, if you're holding down your shot button to the point where you would be locking on with the fairies, if you press your magic button, that will also activate the other version of that spell, the fairy version, which for the blue is the one that I had at that point. It activates a shield around Cotton, actually very useful. But nowhere does it actually tell you that you can activate a second version of the magic spells by holding down your fire button and then pressing by the magic button. And then lastly, we have the green magic. So this one can be rather dangerous to use that way. If you use the fairy version of the green magic, it actually uses up one of your fairies, which a good way to look at them is like options. So if you use up that fairy, you'll be down, like, what do we have right now? We're up to, I believe, 3 fairies. If we were to use up one of those fairies, then we'd be down to just 2, and you would need to collect additional fairies to use that version of the fairy magic. Oh, and for the normal version of the blue magic, it just fires a lightning storm at the enemies, and for the fairy version of the red magic, it ignites the fairies and then launches them at the enemies, kind of rapid fire homing to deal a lot of damage. It's really good for when there's a lot of enemies on screen. So we still find ourselves working our way through stage 1. That's one thing that I can definitely say about this game, is the stages are actually very, very long. And in addition to that, each stage has a branching path. In the original, there was no indication of where that branching path would happen to be, and oftentimes that branch comes significantly before you would actually diverge in the stage itself. So one of the quality of life features that was added to the remake is an indicator of which path you would be selecting. So in the case of the first stage, you might have noticed it really early on, but there was a point where there were a blue and a green arrow on either side of the stage, and depending on which side of a tree you went on, that's your route choice right there. So we find ourselves facing the first boss. That whole anime cutscene that was loading up basically gives you an introduction to this boss, Gebo Gebo. He was a bit smaller, ate one of the special willow candies, grew massive in size, and now we find ourselves fighting the boss. So one feature we haven't talked about with the co-op partner is the co-op partner cannot take damage. They are invulnerable, which can make helping fight a boss like this very, very useful, as they can just sit in front of the boss, take shots, while the boss kind of aggroes on Cotton themselves. So I'm going to use some of the green magic to finish off this boss. Another element of the magic that's also not explained, when you hit the magic button itself to activate the spell, you are invincible for 3 seconds after using the magic. So that's something that comes from the Japanese manual, and once again, I really, really wish that there was a tutorial or a manual somewhere for this release. Just a little bit of focused fire, and that's stage 1 down. And as with all Cottons, we have the awesome tea time. So this is a quick bonus game that's always at the end of a Cotton stage, where we can collect these teacups for bonus points. It's actually really nice with the co-op version, as both characters can collect the teacups, netting you some massive points. Then we get our bonuses at the end. We have like any extra magic spells we get a bonus for, the tea itself, and then on to our next cutscene. So there is a story going on about the Cotton going through this whole stamp rally to ultimately get to the castle to find this legendary willow, this candy that she's looking for. And watching the cutscenes does give you a good idea of the story itself. It's kind of debatable whether or not Cotton's all that good of a character, but I do find the cutscenes to be amusing, though they might not necessarily be to everybody's taste. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the items that we've been picking up. So this stage in particular, we're starting off with seeing a whole bunch of these stars, and they're just bonus point items we can collect to increase our score. However, there are other items that we can obtain. So there are these golden pots that kind of look like Buddha heads called aitatas, and those will have within them one of 4 possible items. So those possible items include those bonus stars that we just saw. There are also hearts that will revive Cotton's HP. You can also get fairies from those particular aitatas. And lastly, there's these crystals that come from the aitatas, and that's the most important part for what they deliver. There are the magic crystals. So the magic crystals come in 4 different flavors. The yellow will increase the power of our main shot. However, you can continue to shoot that crystal and it'll change to different colors, cycling from red to blue to ultimately it cycles from red to blue to green and then ultimately back to yellow. So the yellow is just experience for our shot, which powers up from level 1 all the way up to level 8. You can see that level on the left by the little Cotton character icon there, as well as Cotton's HP. Then of course we have the 3 different magic types that I've already talked about. And basically with all that, that is Rainbow Cotton Remastered, served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, so there are some issues that I take with the game, and this kind of stems back to the original Cotton, less so just the remake. As far as some of the issues with Cotton and the whole life system, so that you don't have any invulnerability frames after you get hit. So depending on what kind of attacks you find yourself in the middle of, it's possible to take a lot of damage very, very quickly. And for some boss fights in particular, that can be very frustrating. In addition to that, some people have noted, and I can agree, that the Cotton sprite is really large, though it's not as big of a problem in this widescreen presentation as it was in the original standard definition presentation of the original game. So as far as that's concerned, we're definitely better off here, but the Cotton sprite does obscure a lot of the screen. So it's that common problem with a lot of other third-person rail shooters, where your character will both obscure where you're shooting, so it's difficult to see where you're firing at the enemy. In addition to that, but it's easy to miss enemies firing at you, and thus you're taking a lot of damage from things that you probably didn't even know were about to hit you. There's some minor frustrations with difficulty spikes as well, but those are easily overcome just by playing through and grinding through the stages a few more times to learn both boss patterns as well as enemy patterns, since those are fixed. As far as the plus flavors are concerned, I love all the various quality of life improvements that they made for the game. So, like launching the fairies at the enemies on the Dreamcast version, you don't know what you're locked onto. So, having like that indicated is huge. Having indications of where the routes diverge, having a health bar for the bosses is something that I really appreciate having and seeing there. Just all these features that really go and take this title and makes it significantly more accessible for a modern day audience. Then, in addition to all of those quality of life improvements, I just really appreciate kind of the preservation of taking what was a Japanese only Dreamcast title and being able to bring it to a significantly wider audience than the original was available for. Even as far as emulation is concerned, Rainbow Cotton, although it emulates reasonably well, there's still some graphical glitches on even the best Dreamcast emulators. So it's great to be able to see this game delivered to a much wider audience. And then for at least me personally, as a fan of the Cotton franchise, it's great to see this title come out and really the whole series kind of revive after almost 20 years of, actually over 20 years of being dormant. So that's seeing a new Cotton title being announced, whether it be a remaster, a re-release, or a new title altogether, always excites me. So for me, this title is a personal win, but depending on how you like this style of rail shooter, it might not be your jam. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.